Hi everyone, this is Sarah Gagnon. I am going to be teaching you Introduction to Watercolors. So today we are going to be completing this painting. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to show you mixing, show a bit of my process, and just an introduction to it. Now before we start, something I want to share with you is the students who have the best results and learn the fastest and enjoy the most are the ones that can go, take your deep breath and just relax. Let go of the pressure of it having to look like something and just enjoy the process. I want you to know that you do have what it takes to be an excellent painter, to be phenomenal. You have what it takes to let the pressure off and to learn this ability of being at ease while you paint and enjoying the journey and wonder and curiosity. So with that, we're going to get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to draw our composition. Now for this one, the only thing that we have to draw is the line. And we need to plan how big we want our tree. Now this is how the painting's done. There's tons of ways you can change it. So right now the horizon line is up here and it's a portrait and the tree's on this side and it's about that size. You can change it and you can put the horizon line down low and you could put the tree a little bit bigger. Or you could change it and make it a landscape and you can have a low horizon line and a tiny tree. You can have a high horizon line and a medium tree. You can put a couple trees. You can also make it a curve. It doesn't have to be a straight. All kinds of different. You can also do a low curve and a really big tree. So something you want to think about before you start is what orientation do you want your painting? Like where do you want, this is called the horizon line, where do you want this? And how big are you aiming your tree to be? So what I do, so now I'm going to take that away. I'm going to do one similar to this, but I wanted to show you different ways you can change it and different ways you can make it different. Now, when I'm using a straight line, the easiest way I find is to use another piece of watercolor paper because I can line it up with the side. And I'm going to go like that and just make a straight line. And that is all I need to do. All right, we're back. So we're going to go through the supplies. The first supplies is this is your paint, this is your palette. These are your big, medium, and small brush. This is your bush brush. Your bush brush is basically just a medium brush that is smushed and old, and you can take a little bit of acrylic paint. Basically it's just worn out and it's more spread out. This makes it faster and easier for mixing. It also keeps your other medium brushes nice and smooth with a nice tip for longer. So it's got a double purpose. This is your sample piece. The paper underneath are 3 pieces of 11 by 17 just printer paper. I find it really useful to have paper underneath so that it can soak up the extra water and you can test your colors and you can wipe your brush off. This is your water dish. I just use a yogurt container. This is your Kleenex. It is a very important tool for like fixing your mistakes. I'll provide a list of the supplies we use in class and you'll be able to download it. Most of these supplies are found at Opus, but these brushes I actually get at the dollar store. Yeah, they're really good quality brushes and they work really well. So with that, we're going to get started with mixing. Now, the first color we're going to mix is our background color, the sky color. We always start from the furthest back and we get closer and closer. And the first mixing method we're going to use is the water method. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your yellow brush, or your bush brush, you're going to dip it in the water and you're going to scrape it against the side. You're going to dip in the water and scrape against the side. You're going to usually find, like in class, we'll have an amount on a board of how much paint you'll need for each section, but if you're at home and you're trying to figure out how much paint you need to mix, what I do is I look at the darkest area of the paint because that's the actual color. The rest is just gradations mixed with water. And I create how much of the page is actually covered by this darkest area, like about a quarter. So I'm going to put about a quarter of a pod of water in there. Now it's really hard to see from the video, but what you're going to do is you're going to look at the gap between the water and the top and see how wide that gap is. If it looks like half, then you're half full, quarter, so on and so forth. I usually just barely fill it for quarter. Then I'm going to dip my yellow brush in it, and I'm going to dip it in the blue, in this case, and mix it, and then transfer. Now, if you don't know what your colors are, because that's very common, especially like some of the colors can look similar, just test it here, and you can put it on the side, and you can clean your brush off, and test the next one, put it on the side, and so on and so forth. So you're mixing your blue back and forth, and then I'm going to add a little bit of green to it, because that one is a little bit turquoisey. Now, when it comes time to testing your paint, the color you see isn't the color that it actually is. So you're going to mix it, take it off on the side, and then you're going to test it. Now, it's really important to test it flat. That's what flat looks like. This is what bumpy looks like. Now, as you can see, this color is not the real color. This one is. Another tip is make sure your painting is not near your mixing area, because sometimes paint splatters and you don't want it to get on your painting. So you don't want it to be a bumpy test, because that isn't showing your accurate color. You know what's bumpy is if you move it and it's moving around, or a flat test, you're not going to see any movement. That's not your real color, this is. So it's really important that mix it really, really well, take it off on the side, and test it. So one thing I see people doing is they'll mix, but then they won't, like they'll mix it here and then they'll put it in here, but they won't mix it very well. And then they'll go to test it, and it will be that color on their brush. Like it'll be this color on the brush versus the mixed color on here. So it's really important, mix it really well, take it off on the side at least 2 or 3 times and test it. And that's going to be your color. Then you can hold that up and go, how do I like that? You're going for the darkest color that you want on your sky. So I'm just going to go with a little bit darker. And now we've got our color mixed, and now we're ready to paint our background. Welcome back. So we are going to be starting with painting our sky. So with watercolor, there's a certain section that you're painting, you want to keep that whole section wet at the same time. If it's all wet, it'll be smooth. But if part of it's wet, part of it's dry, you'll get inconsistent marks. We've got a troubleshooting sheet here that I've made that I'll have available to download. But I'm hoping you can see it clearly on here. If it's inconsistent, you'll see these brush marks, where here you'll see it all nice and smooth. Or if you get water drops on it, then you'll get these what's called blooms. So the goal is to keep a consistent amount of water on your section. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your big brush and you're going to just go back and forth and put lots of water on it. Now you can't really tell from on top if it's all wet. So if you tilt your head, then you'll be able to see it and make sure it's all super shiny. Once you see that it's all super shiny, you're going to lift it up, because right now there's puddles on it and it's an inconsistent shine. So you're going to take it here and you're going to tilt it, and you want to see the drops come off. Then you know that you had enough water, and that also makes it so that's a consistent amount of water. Then you're going to put it back and dry your brush off. It's really important that your brush is dry, because if I go from here straight into here with my color on, that's all, like if I go in here with a full pot of water, it's going to lighten my color significantly. But right now it's perfect. So I want my brush to be dry so that I don't tamper with that color. So it's all wet, making sure it's all shiny, dry my brush off. I'm going to dip my paint in. Now you can go slow as you want with the water, but once you start putting the paint on, you want to go fairly quickly, because you want it all to be wet consistently at the same time. Otherwise you'll get those marks. So I'm putting my color on, and it's not to be like, oh no, it's just, you want to stay fairly consistent. You don't want to stop in the middle and talk to your friend. So I'm going around the edges, and I'm getting more paint, and I'm swirling, and I'm deciding where do I want my lightest spot. Right here, the lightest spot's kind of in the middle. Do I want it in the middle, or do I want it more off to the side? I'm just going to kind of have it in the middle, maybe a little bit more to the middle, or more to the side. And then I'm going to clean my brush off and dry it off. Now, at this point, you could just leave it. If you like it, totally leave it. This one, do you see how it's blended more? Like there's no line between the white and the blue is just a gradation. So if you want that gradation look, then you're going to clean your brush and dry it off, and you're going to blend. Now, when you're blending a light color and a dark color, you have most of your brush on the light color and you're barely touching the dark color in little circles. So you're going like this, barely touching the dark color and going back down, barely. And you see how I'm holding my brush really far back? That helps me hold my brush loose. If I hold my brush too hard, I'll move the paint too much. See how I did that? Now it's a consistent blend. Now we've got two other problems. One, we've got puddles. See right here along the top? If you have puddles there, then you'll get like these marks or even these marks along the sides. So to get a puddle off, I'm drying my brush off and I'm pulling it off. I've also got, I don't know if you can see that from the screen, but there's a puddle underneath the page, and that will cause this. It's called a side bloom. And the water will come up over the side and make a mark if it dries like that. So I need to move this off of that puddle. Now, one more thing I want to show you before we move on to the next one is troubleshooting. So this is a sky, it's well blended, everything's working really well. What happens if you overblend it? So if I go like this and I'm just blending it too much, kind of all over the place, and oh no, I've lost my light spot. If that happens to you, don't worry. You can take your Kleenex and you can go straight down and straight up and just very lightly press in the middle. Now you've got a choice. You could leave it like this and go, oh yeah, that looks really good, perfect. Or you can clean your brush off, dry it off, and you can very lightly put some water in there and put some more color on the sides. Clean my brush off, dry it off. And you see how there's still a tiny bit of a line right there. Whenever you're blending, you're looking for that line. And that's your first priority, is home in on that line. Now it's all blended, it's all good, despite me over blending at the beginning. Now, do you see these marks, these little tiny dots? Some people like those, some people don't. If you like them, I'll show you how to create them. If you don't, just leave it like this. So what I do is I take my bush brush, and I'm going to actually move this over, and then I'm going to bang my bush brush against my finger. And I'm going to bang my bush brush against my finger on the side until the little drops coming off are really tiny. Once they're really tiny, then I'm going to look really close, and I'm going to make sure it's not super shiny, because these dots will only work if it's slightly almost getting dry. Then I'm going to go like this on here. See how instantly it creates those dots? Those dots can only be created while the background's all still semi-wet. If the background's dry, you won't be able to get those types of dots. There are other types of dots you can do, but not those ones. So maybe I'll even put a little bit more on. So now your sky is complete. At this point, you want to blow dry it, because with watercolor, if two sections that are wet and touch at the same time, they'll just leak together. But if one section's dry and one section's wet, then they won't leak together. So it's really important with watercolor, that's one of the keys, is make sure two wet areas don't touch. So to avoid that, you blow dry. Now when you're blow drying, my recommendation is hold the blow dryer a little bit higher and move it around tons. That way it blow dries faster. You know it's dry if, one, it doesn't look shiny, and two, what I usually do is I use the back of my finger, because I can press lighter with the back of my finger, and I just barely touch it. And if it feels warm, then it's dry. If it's cool or clammy, then it needs a little bit longer. Sometimes I'll even take the back and I'll test this area too, because you want that to feel warm as well. So I'll let you guys blow dry. Welcome back. So I've got it nice and dry. The next thing we're going to be painting is the green grass. Now, when you look at that, you can see there's two greens. There's this green down here, and then there's this green. So we're going to be mixing both. We're going to be using the water method for the light green. So we're going to take our yellow brush, and as you can see, you don't want your paints right beside each other because they jump into each other's pods. So it's better to leave like an empty one in between them. And when I look at this light green, again, I would say about a third of the page that darkest version of the light green is touching. So I'm going to put about a third of a pod, about 3 or 4 scoops. Then this green is yellow and green mixed. Now yellow is the most sensitive color, black is the most powerful. So if you're ever adding yellow or gold or even orange, like lighter or pink colors, if you're ever mixing those ones, those are most sensitive. So that's when those ones you want to mix first. You also want to make sure your brush is the cleanest and your water is the cleanest, because they're the easiest to get contaminated. So anytime that you're going into any of the lighter versions, make sure your brush is super, super clean. And the opposite is true. If you ever go into a black color, you don't have to have a clean brush at all, because black overpowers any of the colors. Also, a note about black, it's super powerful. So even a hair of black will overpower colors very quickly, and you can't take black, like you can't take it away. So if you ever mix too much black in something, then you'll have to start again. So that one be really minimal. This one, you've got lots. So I'm going to dip my brush in the water. I'm going to dip in the yellow, and I'm going to do frictions. You can see like I used a clean brush and clean water, but there still seems to be like a little bit of green in there. That's because obviously my brush wasn't clean enough. So I'm going to clean it really, really well. Dry it off, because the yellow is the easiest color to get contaminated with the other colors. Sometimes I'll just go like that. I'll mix it and I'll put it on the side to keep it from getting further contaminated. That's also what you would do if you want to like add a yellow to an already existing color. You would take some water, mix it, and more transfer it on the side so that it doesn't get mixed into that. That's just a side note. And then I'm going to go in here and I'm going to add some green. The green I'm just going to add ever so slowly, because the green will overpower the yellow quite quickly. And then I'm going to mix it, take it off on the side 3 times, and then test it here. And now my goal is that it looks like the darkest. If I'm going for this color, I would want the darkest version of that color. So it doesn't have enough green. It doesn't even look like it has enough yellow in it, but let's just start with adding some more green. Common occurrence too is that people will start with too much paint in here, and then it'll take long for them to get it dark enough. So mine's almost borderline too full, because I only need a third. It's almost a half. So I'm just taking some of the extra out and putting in here. Then I can develop this color faster. It's always better to borderline a little bit too much than a little bit too little. But there is a line, because it can take too long to mix your color. And I'm going over here and I'm like, well, that's getting closer, but it still doesn't feel dark enough. I like that color. It's still a little bit lighter, but it's close enough. Now, so that's the water method. Now we're going to introduce a new mixing method. This is for colors that you want that are super, super dark. I call this one the scooping method. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip my brush in the water, wash it off because I had that other color in it, and then I'm going to dip it in my desired color, and then I'm going to mix it for at least 10 seconds, doing circles. Then I'm going to transfer it on the side. I repeat, I'm not putting any water in here first. When you're working with a dark color, the water makes it too light and takes too long to get it dark. That's why you're going from water to paint, mixing it for a good 10 to 20 seconds in little circles, and then transferring. When you see how my whole brush is in the paint, you don't want just the top of your brush and mixing and transferring, because that will take forever, especially when you're mixing a dark color. You want to get your whole brush in there and mix really, really well. And when I look at this darkest color, I'm going, okay, that's about a quarter of it full. See, it is building. I'm mixing, transferring. It's always a good idea to have your painting away from your mixing area, because it's very often that it splashes, especially with the scooping method. I find it just is a higher probability. Now I'm going to take just a hair. Like, look at how I'm just putting the tip of my brush in. That's the only time I use the tip of my brush, is when I'm using black, because black overpowers so quickly. Then I'm taking it off on the side and I'm testing it. Now it's a good idea, I have my light green on the top, to test it with your light green, so that you can see even on your sample piece kind of your colors and how they'll look on your painting. I might put just a hair more black in that. All right, it's time to paint our grass. So what you're going to do, just brush out, so it's ready to go. I'm going to do the same thing that I did for the sky. I'm going to put water on it. And I'm going to put a consistent amount of water on it. Now I'm spreading the water out. I want to make sure, do you see how my brush is coming all the way off the page each time? If some of you, like I have a tiny, tiny piece of my sky that went into here. If more of it went in, you just kind of scrub it back. Do you see how I did that? And it made it disappear. You can do that anytime you have mistakes that are dry and they've gone into an area that you don't want. See, I could just pull it back a little bit more right there. Tilting your head, making sure there's no dry areas, a couple extra for good measure. Then I'm taking over here and I'm tilting it. When you tilt it, you also see it at a different angle. Like now that I'm tilting it, I'm realizing, oh, there's actually some dry areas right here. And I'm making sure that there are drops that come off. You can go as slow as you want with the water, but once you start putting the paint on, then you want to go fast. Now sometimes your paper will warp like this because it's just a common occurrence with wet on paper. What I usually do is I take another brush and I just kind of flatten it out. And then I'll start painting with that, and then it will eventually flatten out. So now I'm going to dry my brush off because you don't want to have a brush wet, like a full wet brush going into here, because otherwise your color will be super light. A dry brush going with my light in, and I'm going fairly quickly. The quicker you can go, even I'll switch along the top. The beginning, the more time you have to kind of play and to experiment. But right now, I'm just putting it down. Then I'm going to dry my brush off. In this case, I don't have to wash my brush off because I'm going from a lighter version to a darker version of the same color. In this case, it's green, so I don't necessarily have to wash in between. It's another kind of trick for doing things a little bit faster. I'm going to dry my brush off. Then I'm going in, I might even use this a little bit, it's still warping. Going in with my dark, and I'm putting my dark just along the bottom. Now I've got my dark touching my light, but there's a line. Line means it needs to be blended. So I'm cleaning my brush off, drying it off. Then I'm going to put half my brush on one side of the line and half my brush on the other side of the line. Do you see where my brush is laying right now? But I'm going to be having it like this, but you can see that's where I'm positioning it. So it's half on each side of the line, half on this side and half on this side. Then I'm putting it down and I'm going back and forth across the page. Coming right off the page, back and forth, and slowly coming up, and then slowly coming down, and then slowly coming up, and then slowly coming down. Then I'm going to dry my brush off. There's a bit of puddles right here. I'm going to pull those puddles off. Make it nice and smooth at the top. Then there, do you see how this area is lighter at the top? And it's actually darker at the bottom too. So to do that, first of all, before I do that, do you see how there's puddles around this edge? If you leave it like that, you'll get this, that side bloom. So you want to always be aware, if there's puddles, don't leave them or don't let it dry. So I'm just going to ever so lightly lift it. And sometimes I just take my Kleenex and go, just dab it up a little bit. Then I'm going to clean my brush off, dry it off, and I'm going to pull. Do you see how I'm holding my brush instead of this way? I'm holding it this way, and I'm going to pull it off the top where I want it the lightest. Then, if I want a bit of texture, like there's lines and texture in here, I can go across here, and I can just add more lines. I can kind of curve. Do a little curve stroke with my brush. Do you see how I'm adding texture in there across the whole green grass? And then I can take more of my dark and put more just at the very base. And even kind of blending it in. There's a little bit of a line there again. So if you do put more, you want to make sure that you haven't got a line. So I'm just going to ever so slightly kind of blend back and forth in that line. And then I've got my grass. So, oh, actually let's do some problems. First of all, one of the first problems is people blend too much. See, on this section, the green came up too high and you're like, I don't really like that. Or if you lose your light green, clean your brush off, dry it off, and then just kind of smooth out the top area. You always want your brush, if you're going into a semi dry area, you want your brush to be semi-dry. You never want a super wet brush going onto an almost dry area because you'll get these blooms. If it's consistent, then it works really well, like a consistent wetness. So then I pulled the dark green off and I'm gonna add those little marks, and maybe I'll put a little bit more dark green just at the bottom. And I could even, with dark green, kind of do some little strokes. I've got a little brush stroke there. All right. So you guys can go paint your grass now. Welcome back. So my grass is done, it's blow dried. The next thing we're going to be doing is the trunk of the tree. So the first thing you want to do is you're going to mix your trunk, and it works best to do the scooping technique. You can do the water technique too, either one works. So I'm just going to take my brush, put it in the brown, mix it for a good 10 seconds. And then scoop it on the side. And as you can see, it's a very small amount of brown you need. So I'm only going to do maybe 2 scoops. Make sure that it's dark enough. And then maybe put a hair of black in it. Now, black doesn't make colors darker. It's a common misconception. It can make it darker if the color is already as dark as you can get it, which if the color looks like this brown, like the color that you see in the palette, then black can make it darker. But if it's not this brown yet, then it will just make it grayer, if that makes sense. So you're adding black only when you've got to the darkest you can get it here. And testing that. And now I've got a color palette, meaning I've got colors going on here, and I can hold this up and make sure that I like this color in retrospect to these colors. And I'm like, yeah, I like it. So then I'm going to take my medium or my small brush. I'm going to load my brush. Now, there's a couple different ways to load your brush. Loading means putting paint on your brush. Now, there's a full load, which is the brush either in water or in paint completely submerged. You usually use that for backgrounds. Then there's a half load, which means you fill it, like you submerge it, then you take it off on the side a couple times. And that's when you're doing finer, detailed things, because you want to have a nice tip. If this is a full load, you see how the tip has just got drips coming off? You haven't got a nice tip because you've got water in the way. But if you load it, you take it off on the side, now you've got a nice tip. So we're going to do the same thing with the paint now. We're loading it, that means we're putting paint on it, but then we're taking it off so that we've got a nice tip. And anytime you're doing anything that's detailed, this is a fine line. I'll load it, test it on the side first. So you can see, okay, how much paint do I have on my brush and what's going on. Then also when you're doing detail, don't hold your brush like this because otherwise you'll get lines like this. Hold your brush more straight up and down, meaning it's like pointed at the ceiling. Now I'm going to decide, where do I want my tree? Do I want it on this side? Do I want it on this side? Do I want it in the middle? Where do I want it? I think I'll just do it similar to this one. So I'm going to go over here. Sometimes I find it easier to tilt it. And I'm going to start with a line. And I'm doing kind of a sketching technique. It's a really nice technique when you're doing fine detail. Every time I load my brush, I'm taking it off a couple times, testing it, and then going back over here. Kind of, I did one line, and then I'm doing another line. It's almost like 2 small C's, and then you can fill it in. And then you can do a Y. It's actually a really good idea to test it on your paper first. I'm testing it along with it so that you can kind of get a good feel for your branches. So I'm making it into a Y. And then if you want to, you can have a couple branches coming off of that Y. And then you're going to blow dry it. All right, we're back. So we've got our branches blow dried. Next, we're going to be doing the foliage. So for that, we are going to take our bush brush because it's a bushy area, and that's the glory of bush brushes. So as you can see, it wasn't clean, so I need to wash it off. Now, the other nice thing about bush brushes is, I'm going to move this over so you can see it, you can go like this with bush brushes, where other brushes, it would destroy them. It would destroy this nice tip, but with bush brushes, they're already destroyed. So there's no harm. There's no point of no return. And to be able to get that bush look, you need to have it pounded out and as spread out as possible. Then what you're going to do, actually it's good to test it here first. You're going to take a little bit of your light green, you're going to load it, test it here, so that you're just pressing really light and you've got that look. You don't want it like this. See the difference? So you want to load it, take it off on the side so it's like a medium or a dry load, kind of test it here a little bit, and then you're going to put it on here. So now I'm going to go over here and I go, okay, I've loaded it, taken it off the side, and now the first thing that you want to cover is where the branches meet the sky, because you never see that, it's covered in leaves. And then I'm going to shape my tree. Okay, kind of make it wiggly on the edges. Now I'm going to take my dark green, test it here, and then I'm going to put the dark green just at the bottom of the tree. And you see how I've got a line between the light green and the dark green? You can dry your brush off and then just dab along that line. Even taking a little bit more of your dark green and putting a little bit of it higher up. Now the common things that I see that go wrong, oh, there is still a line there. The common things that I see that go wrong with this tree is the first one, people will get it too solid. It's actually not too bad. There. See how that looks really solid and this side looks less, like this kind of looks bushier. What you can do is if you're finding it looks too solid and it's still wet, first thing to do, take your Kleenex and dab it. Because it might not make it go away completely, but it makes it go away enough that you can put another layer on top. Now that it's dabbed, dry your brush, like load your brush, and then you're going to put another layer on top. And the key is make it really tiny, really airy near the edges. If it's airy near the edges, the whole thing looks airy. Kind of going around the edges, making it airy, maybe making this side a little bit bigger. Drying my brush off, going in with my dark green. You can even go straight into this green sometimes. It's called air mixing. We're going to go over that in one of the other lessons. And just to get a little tiny bit of a darkest color. Sometimes, like in class, we usually recommend that people test it here fully, like they do the tree fully on here, then they practice it fully on here because you get the feel of how hard to press on the brush because you don't want to press too hard and you don't want to press too light. And then you go on to this guy. So I'll let you guys paint your tree. All right, the last part is this black line, if you want it. Personally, I kind of like it better without the black line. This is a composition thing. For some people, it just blocks the sky and the land better, and it makes it just compositionally more appealing. Is it a realistic thing? No, it's more just an eye-appealing technique. But I'm going to show you it, but you definitely don't have to do it. If you're like, nope, I like it as it is, don't worry about it. So you're going to mix your color that you want for that line. So I'm going to dip my brush in the water, dip it in the black. Because black overpowers all the other colors, rather than mixing the amount of black, I'm just going to add the black to my brown. And you can see on my sample piece, it'll look almost pure black. And I'm just going to use that. I could go a little bit darker, but I think it's good. Then I'm going to dry my brush off, load it. That means put the paint on it. Take it off on the side because it's a detail. Anytime there's a detail, you always want a medium load. So you load it, take it off on the side. Now for straight lines, any kind of straight lines, it's really hard to triangle like this. The easiest way to do it is to tilt your page so that it's a continual, like smooth motion. Then I'm going to hold my brush straight up and down, and I'm going to go right across that line. Now let's say you are going across and you accidentally wiggle. Oh no, I made it inconsistent. Then you just make your line a little bit thicker. So that's why the first time you want to make it as thin as possible because it might get a little bit thicker. And then you're like, yep, I really like it. There's one area that's a little bit wider there. There is some things you can do to make it less wide. If you blow dried it, you can clean your brush off and dry it off and try to pull or scrub back a little bit and dab with a Kleenex, but I'm just going to leave it. The last section is your signature. So I'm going to show you two ways of doing your signature. One is with a paintbrush. So if you are doing it with a paintbrush, take your small brush, have a color that's mixed here, load it, take it off on the side a whole bunch of times because this is a very fine detail, holding it straight up and down. Always practice it here before doing it on this one. Hold it straight up and down, and if you're like, yeah, I'm pleased with it, then move on to your painting. If you're like, if it didn't work out here, then I would recommend using a thin Sharpie. And just like with the paint, I would practice the thin Sharpie here so you can feel the consistency of it. Now, when you're putting your signature on, you don't want your signature right on the bottom. One, it doesn't look very professional, and two, if you matted it or framed it, it would cut it off because it cuts about 1/4 inch from the sides. So you want your signature a little, I usually say like 1/2 inch from the bottom and 1/2 inch from the side. And that looks the most professional. Usually people put their, this got a little bit of water on it, but that's okay. Usually people put their signature on the right-hand side. I usually put it on the right-hand side as well, unless I have my focal point. Like if this tree was on the right-hand side, I wouldn't put my signature and the tree on the same side. I would split them up and put one on each side because then it just looks more appealing. So I'm going to sign it a little bit up from the side. And then we did smudge here, so it's actually good. I'm going to show you a quick extra tip on how to fix smudges with a squirt bottle. So we'll be right back. Welcome back. So I've got a squirt bottle. I use like these little tiny squirt bottles from the dollar store. Anytime you're using a squirt bottle to fix any inconsistencies in your watercolor, there's a couple big tips. One, never hold your squirt bottle close. If you hold your squirt bottle close, you'll get marks like this, or like this where your lines will bleed, or like this where you'll get these little white dots. Always hold your brush or your squirt bottle, I know it'll be kind of hard to see, but about 2 feet away. So if this is my painting, about that far, and never hold it right above. Because if you hold it right above, a drop might land on it. Always hold it a little bit far and squirt into it. So I'm going to hold my squirt bottle. I'm going to try and make it so you can see it the clearest. I'm going to hold it kind of far back, and I'm going to give it a couple mists. Now that it's misted a little bit, I'm going to take my yellow brush, clean it off, dry it off really, really, really well. I'm going to take my Kleenex, dry it into my Kleenex, and then I'm going to hold my brush like this. Do you see I'm holding my brush really far back because I want to hold it really loose. I don't want to press really hard. Now, as I was talking, it kind of dried a bit. So I'm going to mist it one more time. It's creating a little bit of those white lines. I don't know if you can see that well. If you hold it, so it's kind of fun. I did hold it too close and it created those little tiny white areas. But what you do is you hold it kind of far back, mist it, and then you just do tiny little circles. I'm going to mist it one more time. And I'm holding it really far back, and I'm just doing ever so light circles. And my goal is just to kind of blend that spot into the background. So now, yeah, you can kind of still see it, but it's not just this one blob. It just diffused into the background. That's your goal with the squirt bottle, is that, oh, actually there's this background, so we can practice here. If this was your dot right here, your goal is not to smudge or to blend the whole dot. Your goal is just to smudge the edges of the dot. See how I'm just smudging the edges? It's tough because you've got a white background, but it still made it less obvious than here. And you're just pressing super, super light, blending the edges. So that's kind of a beginner painting. Now the next thing we're going to do is clean up. Now, as soon as your painting's finished and signed, my recommendation is don't have it anywhere near your cleanup area. The first thing to do is relocate it, because cleanup is where water splashes everywhere, and the worst thing is to get it splashing on your painting. So take your painting, move it off to the side. In class, we usually use one of the side counters. And then you're going to take your water dish. And what I do first is I take my yellow brush and I clean my brush off, dry it off, and I'm checking my colors. Is there any colors that got messed up? My white is a little bit inconsistent. So I'm going to clean my brush off, dry it off, pull that top layer of the white off. Even though we didn't use white in this class, it was kind of messed up from another time. Clean it off, dry it off. Then there's a little bit of green in the blue. So I'm going to clean my brush off, dry it off, pull a little bit of that green off. And then there's also a tiny bit of green in the orange. So now my colors are decontaminated. This is just a good idea whether or not you're in class or at home to have your colors all clean. They're fresh for next time. Then what I do is I take my palette and I put it in the water, and then I put it this way so that it's all wet. Then I'm taking my brush, I'm going to try and tilt it, and I'm dipping in the water and I'm swirling around the edges. Dipping, swirling, dipping, swirling. The most crucial part with these palettes is that all of those cracks are paint-free. Because if there's a hair of blue, just a hair in there, and someone goes to put yellow in it the next class, it's completely like the yellow's now green. And same with you for at home. If you've got just a hair of a color in your palette, it will completely change your next colors that you mix. So I'm going around all these edges, I'm flipping it, and my goal right now is just that all the edges, like all the pods that had paint in them, the edges are all cleaned. Now when this, it's not, oh yeah, there's a little bit. Do you see how right in that corner there's still a little bit? We get all those corners. Then you're going to take this to the sink and rinse it all out, and then put fresh water in here. And when there's fresh water in there, then you go back and forth along the bottom with fresh water, and then put it all back, and then you're all good to go. Yeah, I think that's about it. So this is the first model of our introductory watercolor. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know if you have any feedback. And if you paint this, I would love to see it. Email me, let me know. So enjoy your painting. All the best.